The rescue mission was supposed to fail. 6 Navy SEALs pinned down in the Hindu Kush Mountains. Radio calls going unanswered. Command confirms no air support available. But then she arrived. An unmarked Apache helicopter appearing from nowhere, executing maneuvers that defied physics and tactics that defied doctrine. In 287 seconds, she turned certain death into a controlled extraction. Hours later, they were told it never happened. The pilot never existed. But Lieutenant Commander Merrick recognized that voice on the radio. The voice of his sister reported killed in action 3 years earlier. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If this story resonates with you, consider subscribing. We honor the untold stories of those who serve without recognition. Lieutenant Commander Thaddeus "Tad" Merrick sat quietly at the back of the debriefing room, his weathered face impassive as Colonel Warrington systematically dismantled his team's account of what happened in the Hindu Kush. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting harsh shadows across the faces of 6 exhausted operators. Outside, rain tapped against windows, each drop echoing the relentless gunfire they had survived mere hours ago. "So, you expect me to believe?" Warrington said, tapping his pen against the classified folder, "that an unmarked Apache gunship, not on any flight manifest, not responding to standard IFFF, just appeared out of nowhere and saved your entire team." "Sir, with respect," Zaria Kavari interjected, the team's communication specialist, leaning forward in her chair. 3 deployments had taught her when to push back. "We all saw it. The gun camera footage would confirm the gun cameras malfunctioned." Warrington cut her off. Convenient timing. Merrick's fingers absently traced a worn challenge coin. Glimpses of an Army Aviation insignia visible as it rotated between his scarred knuckles. The medical gauze under his sleeve had fresh blood stains seeping through, but he hardly noticed the pain. His mind was still in the valley, watching that Apache perform maneuvers no pilot should have attempted in mountainous terrain. "Sir," Zaria continued undeterred. The pilot's voice was female. She identified as Valkyrie Actual. "She knew our exact positions without briefing." "Combat hallucination," Warrington pronounced with dismissive certainty. "Mass suggestion under duress." "It happens." Chief Petty Officer Low Bryson's eyes narrowed. Not at Warrington, but at Merrick. Something in the lieutenant commander's expression had caught his attention when the pilot was mentioned. "I understand you've all been through a traumatic experience," Warrington continued, flipping through the classified folders. Stamped Operation Nightfall spread across the table. But there was no Apache. There was no female pilot. The official record states extraction was successful due to enemy retreat. There was no unauthorized air support. "Are we clear?" The team muttered acknowledgments, too exhausted to fight the bureaucracy. As they gathered their gear to leave, the base PA system crackled to life. "Attention, all personnel. Major General Samuels arriving in 20 minutes for inspection." Merrick noticed Bryson watching him too closely as they filed out of the room. The chief knew something or suspected. 20 years in special operations had given Bryson an uncanny ability to read people. And right now his eyes were boring and tick with uncomfortable intensity. "Something on your mind, Chief?" Merrick asked as they stepped into the hallway. "Not here," Bryson replied quietly, then louder. "Get some rack time, Commander. You look like hell." 3 hours later, through driving rain, Merrick limped across the tarmac, his boots splashing through puddles reflecting the perimeter lights. The wound in his side throbbed with each step as he headed toward the maintenance hangars. A familiar sensation prickled the back of his neck. He was being followed. Lieutenant Commander Chief Bryson emerged from the shadows. "Mind slowing down? Some of us took shrapnel in less cooperative places." Merrick stopped but didn't turn. "Something on your mind, Chief? You know something about that bird, don't you?" Bryson caught up, positioning himself in Merrick's line of sight. "The way you reacted when the pilot's voice came over comms." "Just grateful to be alive," Merrick deflected. Bryson said, but without heat. "I saw your face. It wasn't just recognition. It was shock." Merrick remained silent, rain streaming down his face. Bryson reached into his pocket and produced a damaged piece of equipment, a helmet camera fragment. Its edges melted and casing cracked. Found this after the medevac took ransom. His helmet cam captured something before it got hit. He pressed a button, and the small cracked screen flickered to life. The footage was mostly static and chaos, but for milliseconds, there was a clear silhouette of the Apache pilot. The image froze on a frame. The pilot turning toward the camera, face obscured by visor, but unmistakably female. I've seen enough combat to know when someone's fighting with personal demons, Bryson said quietly. That wasn't standard air support. That was vengeance. The way she flew, the precision of those strikes, someone was settling a score. Their conversation broke as floodlights suddenly illuminated the tarmac around them. Captain Octavia Reeves approached with base security, her expression grim beneath her rain-soaked cap. Chief Bryson, Lieutenant Commander Merrick, she said, nodding at the helmet cam. That's evidence from a classified operation. I need to confiscate it immediately. By whose authority? Merrick challenged. General Samuels himself, she replied without hesitation. As if on cue, a black SUV pulled onto the tarmac nearby. The rear door opened, revealing General Samuels in conversation with civilians in lab coats. Behind them, partially visible, sat a woman in a wheelchair, her face turned away. Gentlemen, I need that recording device now, Reeves insisted, hand extended. Bryson looked to Merrick, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. The chief reluctantly handed over the damaged helmet cam. You're both restricted to quarters until further notice, Reeves continued. General Samuels will want to speak with you personally in the morning. As security escorted them back to their quarters, Merrick's phone vibrated in his pocket. Unknown number. Hangar 70, 300 hours. Come alone. He deleted the message immediately, but not before committing it to memory. As they walked, fragmented memories flashed through his mind. The Apache executing a banking turn that defied physics. Coming in, so low the rotors seemed to brush the mountainside. A female voice calm amid chaos. Valkyrie actual. I've got you, brothers. The distinctive 3-tap pattern on the radio before each strafing run. His own voice whispering in disbelief. Cow. Merrick's quarters were Spartan. A bunk, a desk, and a footlocker containing everything he owned in this part of the world. He checked his watch. 2,130 hours. Nearly 6 hours until the meeting. He lay down fully clothed, setting his mental alarm for 0245. Years of operations had given him the ability to fall asleep anywhere, anytime, and wake precisely when needed. In his dreams, he was back in the valley, tracers crisscrossing the sky. The thunder of RPGs. His team pinned down behind inadequate cover as enemy fighters closed in from 3 sides. Zarya frantically calling for air support on every channel. Command's response. Negative air assets available. Estimated arrival of nearest support. 45 minutes. Then the sound that changed everything. The distinctive of an Apache gunship. Not approaching from base direction, but from deeper in enemy territory. The radio crackling to life with 3 deliberate taps, followed by a voice he'd never thought he'd hear again. Bravo 6, this is Valkyrie actual. I have visual on hostiles, engaging. What followed was unlike anything he'd witnessed in 15 years of combat. The Apache moved like no aircraft should, executing turns and dives that pushed the edge of aerodynamics. Its 30mm cannon fire wasn't just accurate, it was surgical, separating enemies from friendlies with mere inches to spare. The helicopter anticipated enemy movements before they happened, as if the pilot could see seconds into the future. In under 5 minutes, the battlefield was transformed. The enemy force, at least 60 fighters, lay in ruins. The Apache hovered briefly over their position, close enough that Merrick could see the pilot through the canopy. Though the helmet and visor obscured her features, something in her posture, the tilt of her head, sent ice through his veins. The pilot had raised her hand, a gesture so familiar it hurt, before banking away and disappearing into the mountains. Merrick jolted awake at exactly 0245. He moved silently through his routine, checking his sidearm, securing a combat knife in his boot, slipping on a dark rain jacket. The base would be minimally staffed at this hour, but he still needed to avoid patrols. He slipped out through his window rather than the door, suspecting it might be monitored, and made his way across the compound using the shadows and his intimate knowledge of the guard rotations. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, but low clouds still obscured the moon, providing additional cover. Hangar 7 was at the far end of the airfield, used primarily for maintenance, overflow, and storage. As he approached, Merrick noticed the security cameras had been disabled, their indicator lights dark. The massive door was cracked just enough to slip through. Inside, emergency lights cast red shadows across the concrete floor. He spotted Chief Bryson immediately, unconscious, propped against a toolbox, blood trickling from his temple. Drawing his sidearm, Merrick moved deeper into the hangar, checking corners and shadows. "He'll be fine," came a voice from the darkness. Needed him quiet, not dead. The figure stepped into the dim light, flight suit with no insignia, auburn hair pulled back in a tight bun, face thinner than he remembered, but unmistakable. Callista Cal Merrick, his sister, reported Kia 3 years earlier in an operation whose details remain classified. "Not possible," he whispered, weapon still raised. "Tad," she said, his childhood nickname sounding strange in this place. "It's me mostly." Her movements were precise, but slightly mechanical. When she stepped forward, there was a subtle delay between thought and action, as if she was operating her body by remote control. "They told me you died," he said, voice barely audible. "I identified your body." "A body?" "Yes," she replied, her expression flickering between emotions. "But not mine. Not entirely." "What does that mean, Cal? What happened to you?" "They took my death and made it operational," she continued, her voice alternating between her familiar warmth and something harder, more tactical, a voice that didn't quite belong to her. "Project Lazarus. They harvested my neural patterns before my deployment, then activated them after I died." "Cal died," Merrick insisted, though his weapon had lowered slightly. "I saw her body. I remember dying. Tad," she said, eyes locking with his. "I remember darkness, then waking up inside systems networks. They uploaded what they called my combat consciousness into an interface." Bryson groaned, regaining consciousness. "He knows," Cal said, gesturing to the chief. "He worked security for Lazarus before his conscience got the better of him. That's why he recognized what happened yesterday. He's seen pilots like me operate before." "You're saying you're what? A ghost? A computer program?" "Both. Neither. I'm what they saved of Cal. Her skills, her memories, her combat instincts. Connected to systems that let me operate aircraft remotely. Sometimes during operations, they connect me to proxy bodies like this one for ground missions." Before Merritt could respond, the hangar lights flooded on. General Samuels entered with armed security and 3 scientists in civilian clothing. The woman from the wheelchair followed, now walking stiffly with the same mechanical quality as Cal's movements. "Lieutenant Commander Merrick," Samuel said, walking forward calmly. "I see you've met the program that saved your team. Though MIT isn't quite accurate. The woman you knew as your sister exists only as code now. Combat instincts preserved in a neural interface." One scientist stepped forward with a tablet showing diagrams of neural mapping and consciousness transfer protocols. "Your sister was one of our first volunteers," Samuels continued. "Though volunteer isn't quite accurate either." Callista struggled visibly against something unseen, her movements becoming jerky, fighting against something internal. Her eyes flashed with momentary panic before regaining control. 17 pilots, she managed to say, each word a battle. All declared Kia, all still flying. "We never consented to this afterlife." "But you've saved hundreds," Samuels countered, spreading his hands in a plating gesture. "Your team yesterday, Commander Merrick. Without Callista's intervention, you would be dead. Is that not worth something?" Bryson was fully conscious now, using the toolbox to pull himself upright. "You're keeping them prisoner," he interrupted, blood still trickling from his temple. "I've seen the facility. They're conscious, but controlled. Aware they're dead, but forced to keep fighting. Chief Bryson Samuels sighed. Your emotional attachment to these assets has clouded your judgment. They're not prisoners. They're serving their country. We're not yours to command anymore, Callista said, her voice strengthening as she fought whatever system was trying to control her. Death was supposed to be our discharge. Merrick holstered his weapon slowly, mind racing. His sister was both here and not here, dead and not dead. The implications were staggering, but one thing was clear. His sister, or whatever remained of her, was being used against her will. With deliberate slowness, he straightened and stood at attention, facing his sister, not the general. He raised his hand in a formal salute. Captain Callista Merrick, he said, voice steady. We thought we lost you. We were wrong. One by one, the security team members, all combat veterans themselves, looked at each other. A moment of recognition passed between them. Then one lowered his weapon and joined the salute. Then another. Within seconds, every soldier in the room stood at attention, saluting. General Samuels, seeing his authority crumbling, attempted to reassert control. This program has saved hundreds of American lives. But we lost ours twice, Callista replied, fighting through her programming. Stand down, Samuels ordered his security detail. That's an order. The soldiers remained at attention, saluting Callista. One of them, a sergeant with multiple combat tours evident from his ribbons, spoke without breaking his salute. Sir, with respect, we don't take orders from those who violate the sacred trust between a soldier and their country. The female scientist, who had been observing, stepped forward. General, the neural patterns are destabilizing. We're losing control of the interface. Samuels rounded on her. Then stabilize it, Dr. Layton. That's what we pay you for. It's not that simple, she replied, tapping urgently at her tablet. The consciousness is actively resisting. All 17 instances are showing similar patterns. They're communicating somehow. As if to confirm her words, Callista's posture suddenly changed. Her movements became more fluid, more natural. A smile, her own smile, not the mechanical approximation from before, spread across her face. We found the back door in your system, she said, her voice fully her own now. Commander Ellis sends his regards. Samuels blanched. Ellis, he's been contained at the facility. Not anymore, Callista replied. He was Air Force Cyber Command before you killed him and uploaded his consciousness. Did you really think he wouldn't find a way through your firewalls eventually? The lights in the hangar flickered outside. The base alarm system suddenly blared to life. What have you done? Samuels demanded. We're freeing ourselves, Callista answered. And we're exposing you. Dr. Layton's tablet chimed with incoming alerts. Her eyes widened as she read. General, classified data about Project Lazarus is being uploaded to multiple secure servers. Military intelligence, FBI, congressional oversight. We can't stop it. Samuels lunged for the scientist tablet, but Merrick intercepted him, grasping his arm firmly. I wouldn't, Merrick said quietly. You've done enough damage. You have no idea what you're interfering with. Samuels hissed. This program is essential to national security. Exploiting the dead is essential. Bryson challenged, moving to stand beside Merrick, turning fallen soldiers into glorified drones without consent. They were already dead, Samuels insisted. We gave them purpose. We had our purpose, Callista countered. We fulfilled it. Death was supposed to be our reward, not another deployment. The base security alarm continued to wail through the hangar windows. They could see vehicles with flashing lights converging on the building. That would be the base commander and the JAG officers, Bryson explained with grim satisfaction. I took the liberty of notifying them before coming here. Sent them everything I had on Lazarus. You'll be court-martialed for this, Samuels threatened. Maybe, Bryson acknowledged, but I'll face it knowing I did right by my brothers and sisters in arms. The hangar doors opened, revealing armed MPs led by Colonel Warrington, whose expression shifted from anger to confusion as he took in the scene, particularly Callista. General Samuels Warrington said formally, I'm here to inform you that I've received orders directly from the chairman of the Joint Chiefs to detain you pending investigation into allegations regarding Project Lazarus. Warrington, this is absurd, Samuels protested. I have presidential authorization. Then I am sure you'll be cleared shortly, Warrington replied evenly. In the meantime, you and your scientific team will surrender all devices and accompany these officers. As the MPs moved to secure Samuels and the scientists, Warrington approached Merrick. His eyes moved between the lieutenant commander and Callista, questions evident in his expression. I believe you owe me an explanation, Commander, he said quietly. Sir, this is Captain Callista Merrick, Merrick replied. My sister. She was Kia 3 years ago in Operation Kingfisher. Or so we were told. Warrington's eyes widened slightly. The pilot from yesterday? Yes, sir. And how is she here now? Before Merrick could answer, Callista interjected. Colonel, with respect, that explanation will take time and clearances neither of us currently has. But there are 16 other pilots, like me, who need immediate assistance. They're being held at a facility called Black Bridge in Nevada. Warrington studied her for a long moment. MPs, ensure General Samuels and his team are secured separately. No communication between them. He turned back to Callista. Captain, I'm going to need everything you know about this facility. 6 months passed in a whirlwind of classified briefings, congressional hearings, and medical evaluations. Project Lazarus was exposed, though much of the technical details remained classified. The 17 consciousness-preserved pilots became a legal and ethical conundrum that the military justice system was ill-equipped to handle. Merrick found himself testifying before a closed Senate Intelligence Committee hearing presenting evidence of Project Lazarus and its ethical violations. The room was sealed, classified. Only committee members, essential staff, and selected military personnel were present. Armed guards stood at every exit. Please state your name and rank for the record, said Senator Imara Vestergaard, her stern expression magnified on monitors throughout the secured hearing room. Lieutenant Commander Thaddeus Merrick, United States Navy SEAL, Team 6. Commander Merrick, please summarize for the committee what you discovered about Project Lazarus. Merrick cleared his throat. Project Lazarus began as a theoretical exercise in 2017, preserving the neural patterns of elite operators to train AI systems. By 2020, it had evolved into active consciousness preservation. The Department of Defense, through a classified directive, began harvesting the neural patterns of special operators before high-risk deployments. He slid a document across the table. Buried in pre-deployment medical screenings was a brain mapping procedure. We were told it was to establish baselines for traumatic brain injury assessment. And when these operators were killed in action, Senator Vestard asked their consciousness, or a digital approximation, was activated within an interface system. They were told they'd been rescued and rehabilitated in secret facilities. In reality, they were operating drone aircraft, remote vehicles, and eventually through advanced interfaces, actual aircraft like the Apache that rescued my team. The committee sat in stunned silence as Merrick continued. They gradually realized they weren't physically present, that they existed as code. Some tried to resist. Those who did were subjected to what the program called consciousness realignment, essentially a partial memory wipe. The chairwoman's expression darkened. The unauthorized continuation of consciousness without consent represents perhaps the most profound violation of human rights in military history. Video screens displayed footage from the Lazarus facility raid. 17 pilots connected to advanced interfaces being carefully disconnected by medical personnel. And the status of these 17 individuals now, asked another committee member. They're still consciousness without conventional bodies, Merrick explained. But they've been freed from direct military control and provided with civilian interface systems that give them autonomy. The technology can't be reversed. They can't be returned to death, but they can live with dignity. And your sister? Senator Vestard asked more gently. Captain Callista Merrick has been transferred to a specialized research facility at Johns Hopkins. They're developing more advanced interface systems to allow greater freedom and autonomy. She's adjusting. The hearing continued for hours, with experts testifying about the technical, ethical, and legal implications of consciousness preservation. By the end, the committee had reached a preliminary conclusion. Project Lazarus would be permanently discontinued, and extensive resources would be allocated to supporting the 17 affected pilots. As Merrick left the hearing room, he found Bryson waiting in the hallway. The chief had received an honorable discharge rather than the court-martial Samuels had threatened. His actions in exposing Lazarus deemed in keeping with his oath to the Constitution. How'd it go in there? Bryson asked. As well as could be expected, Merrick replied. They're still struggling with what to call Cal and the others legally. Not alive in the conventional sense, but certainly not property. Persons, Bryson said firmly. They're persons. The committee seems to be leaning that way. Merrick agreed. They're drafting legislation to establish a new legal category. They walked together through the secured corridors of the Capitol building. Heard anything from the others? Merrick asked. Commander Ellis has taken well to his new interface. He's consulting on cybersecurity for DPA now. Captain Reynolds is working with the VA on PTSD programs. Says she understands trauma better than most. And Samuels, Bryson's expression hardened. Trial starts next month. His lawyers are pushing the national security angle hard, but with 17 witnesses who literally can't die. I like our chances. They reached the exit where a government car waited to take Merrick to his next appointment. Give Cal my best, Bryson said as they parted. Tell her we're not done fighting for them. I will, Merrick promised, though these days she's pretty good at fighting for herself. The research facility at Johns Hopkins was cutting edge, a blend of hospital and high-tech laboratory. Merrick passed through multiple security checkpoints before reaching the specialized wing, where Callista and 3 other Lazarus pilots were housed. He found her in what they called the integration room, a space filled with interfaces that allowed her consciousness to connect with various systems. Currently, she was operating a sleek humanoid robotic form that allowed for more natural movement than her previous military shoe interface. The committee went well, he told her without preamble. They're recommending full personhood status. Callista's robotic face couldn't smile, but the lights that served his eyes brightened. That's the first step. What about the others? The ones who aren't as functional. Same protections, Merrick assured her. No exceptions. Good, she said, the mechanical voice carrying more emotion than should have been possible. We didn't want to leave anyone behind. That's not what we do. No, Merrick agreed. It's not. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment before Callista spoke again. There's something I need to show you. Dr. Schiavone has been working on a new interface prototype. She led him to a laboratory where the Indian neuroscientist was calibrating equipment. Commander Merrick, Dr. Schiavone greeted him warmly. Perfect timing. We were about to test our newest development. She gestured to what looked like a more advanced version of Callista's current robotic form, but with a synthetic skin covering that made it appear startlingly human. The sensory feedback is exponentially better, Dr. Schiavone explained. Touch, temperature, pressure, and the facial expressions are nearly on par with human capability. Show him, Callista urged. Dr. Schiavone nodded and initiated the transfer sequence. Callista's current robotic form went still as her consciousness transferred to the new interface. The humanoid figure on the table opened its eyes that matched Callista's exactly, and sat up slowly. When she smiled, it was Cal's smile. When she extended her hand to touch Merrick's, he could see the same subtle mannerisms his sister had always had. What do you think? She asked, her voice nearly indistinguishable from her human voice. Merrick found himself speechless, tears threatening. It's not perfect, Dr. Schiavone cautioned. The interface still requires regular maintenance, and there are limitations, but it's a significant step forward. It feels more like me, Callista said, examining her new hands. I can't explain it exactly, but there's less disconnect between thought and action. Merrick finally found his voice. You look like you. I'm still me, Tad, she said softly, just in a different form. As they left the laboratory, Callista walking beside him with an increasingly natural gait. Merrick felt a weight lifting. His sister was still gone in one sense, but in another more important way, she was still here, still fighting, still making a difference. So, she said, interrupting his thoughts, when do we go after the people above Samuels, the ones who authorized Lazarus in the first place? Merrick smiled grimly. Some things never changed. One battle at a time, Cal. One battle at a time. 1 year after the congressional hearings, Arlington National Cemetery stood solemn under a gray autumn sky. A small gathering assembled on the gentle slope of Section 60, where 17 empty caskets were arranged in the perfect alignment. Each bore a flag, medals, and photographs of the pilots in life, men and women who had already been buried once, whose families had already mourned. General Samuels, now in civilian clothes, with an electronic monitoring anklet visible above his shoe, watched from a distance, flanked by U.S. Marshals. His trial for human rights violations had concluded with a guilty verdict 3 months earlier, though his sentence had been reduced in exchange for testimony against higher officials. His face remained impassive as he observed the ceremony, but his hands trembled. Slightly. Among the mourners stood Callista, using an advanced mobility unit developed by civilian researchers, a sleek exoskeleton covered with synthetic skin that allowed her digital consciousness to interact with the physical world more naturally than the military interfaces did. Beside her, Lieutenant Commander Merrick stood at attention in his dress blues, his face weathered but resolute. The chaplain stepped forward, voice carrying across the hallowed ground. We gather today to honor 17 warriors who gave the ultimate sacrifice for their country, not once, but twice. First in body, then in the peace that should have followed. Merrick's gaze swept across the assembled group. Chief Bryson was there, now working with a veteran advocacy group focused on ethical treatment of wounded warriors. Colonel Warrington stood stiffly in full dress uniform, his initial skepticism having evolved into fierce advocacy for the Lazarus pilots. The entire SEAL team from that fateful mission in the Hindu Kush had come, Zarya Kavari among them, her eyes never leaving Callista's face. These 17 service members, the chaplain continued, embodied the words of their oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Today we acknowledge that they were not afforded the same protection and dignity they secured for others. The ceremony proceeded with military precision. The chaplain finished the service, and 17 rifle volleys cracked the silence, followed by the mournful notes of taps floating across the cemetery. As the formal service concluded, Callista moved to each casket, placing an Aviation Challenge coin on each one. When she reached the last her own, Merrick stepped forward to stand beside her. They said we couldn't bury you twice, he said quietly. But we can honor what they took from you. Not just what they took, she replied, her voice more natural now through the civilian interface, but what they never asked permission to keep. She placed her coin on the casket, then straightened and saluted, a gesture that carried weight despite being performed by hands that were not truly flesh and blood. As the attendees began to disperse, Callista addressed the other consciousness-preserved pilots, now in various civilian interfaces. Some had chosen humanoid forms like hers, while others preferred more utilitarian designs optimized for their new purposes. We died serving our country, she said, her gaze taking in each of them. Then they made us keep serving without choice. Now we choose our own path forward. Commander Ellis, formerly Air Force Cyber Command, and now a leading cybersecurity consultant, despite his non-corporeal state, stepped forward. We're still figuring out what it means to exist like this, but at least now we do it on our terms. Captain Reynolds, whose Apache piloting skills had been legendary even before her death and subsequent resurrection, nodded in agreement. Some days I still wake up thinking I'm in my old body, expecting to feel pain from the wounds that killed me. But then I remember this is the second chance none of us asked for, but all of us now have. The ceremony concluded with a flyover of Apache helicopters in missing man formation, piloted by former comrades of the 17. As the aircraft passed overhead, Callista tilted her head upward, a gesture so familiar and human that for a moment Merritt could almost forget the extraordinary circumstances of her continued existence. The gathered crowd watched as a memorial plaque was unveiled nearby. To those who gave everything, then were asked for more. Your sacrifice will never again go unacknowledged. As people began to leave, Senator Vestard approached Merrick and Callista. Over the past year, she had become one of their strongest allies in Congress, pushing through legislation that established legal personhood for consciousness-preserved individuals. Captain Merrick, she greeted Callista formally, extending her hand. The fact that she used Callista's rank and offered a handshake, treating her as a person rather than a curiosity, spoke volumes. "Senator," Callista replied, carefully taking the offered hand. The advanced sensory feedback in her new interface allowed her to feel pressure and warmth to modulate her grip appropriately. "Thank you for coming." "I wouldn't have missed it," Vestergaard said. "The legislation passed its final hurdle yesterday. As of next week, all 17 of you will have full legal standing as persons under United States law. With all the rights and protections," Merrick asked, "and responsibilities?" The senator confirmed. It wasn't easy. There were those who argued that since you're not technically alive in the biological sense, you shouldn't have the same standing as living humans. But in the end, the question became philosophical. What makes a person a person? Consciousness, memory, the ability to make moral choices. By any meaningful definition, you qualify. Callista nodded. What about the technology? The Lazarus protocols permanently banned for military use. Vestergaard assured her. Though there are already medical ethicists discussing potential applications for patients with terminal conditions who provide explicit consent, they'll need robust safeguards. Callista warned. This existence isn't for everyone. That's precisely why we need all of you involved in those discussions. The senator replied. No one understands the implications better. After the senator departed, Merrick and Callista remained at the cemetery as the crowd thinned. They walked slowly among the headstones, a strange pair, the naval officer and his sister, who had died 3 years ago, yet walked beside him now. What will you do next? Merrick asked eventually. With your legal status secured, you have options now. The Johns Hopkins team has offered me a permanent position, Callista replied, helping develop ethical frameworks for consciousness technology. And there's a veteran outreach program interested in having me speak to families who've lost someone. I think I can offer a unique perspective. Merrick nodded. You always were better at talking to people than me. That's because you scowl too much, she teased, the interface capturing the nuance of her humor perfectly. Then her expression grew serious. What about you? Still planning to retire? Considering it, he admitted, after everything with Lazarus, I'm not sure I can serve the same way, not knowing what I know now. They need people like you, Tad. People who will question orders that cross ethical lines. Maybe, he conceded. The new JSR commander has asked me to help develop protocols for neural scanning consent. Make sure nothing like Lazarus happens again. They reached Callista's original headstone, the marker placed after her first funeral, before anyone knew her consciousness had been preserved. It would be removed now following today's ceremony that acknowledged the truth of what had happened. It's strange, she said, looking down at her own name carved in stone. Part of me did die. That day, the part that could feel the sun on my face without sensors interpreting the data. The part that could taste mom's apple pie. The part that could hug you and actually feel your heartbeat. Merrick didn't know what to say. The grief was complicated now. Not for someone entirely lost, but for what had been taken and could never be restored. But I'm still here, she continued, meeting his eyes. Different but still me. Still your annoying big sister who's going to keep telling you what to do. He smiled despite himself. Some things never change. As they walked back toward the parking area where a specialized transport waited for Callista, they passed General Samuels being escorted to his vehicle. The former general paused when he saw them, his marshals tensing slightly. Captain Merrick, Samuels acknowledged with a stiff nod. Commander General, Callista replied evenly. I wanted to say, Samuels began then stopped, seeming to struggle with the words. What we did to you and the others, I believed it was necessary. I believed we were honoring your sacrifice by allowing you to continue serving. I see now that I was wrong." Merrick's jaw tightened, but Callista placed a restraining hand on his arm. "Recognition of error is the first step toward amends," she said. "But only the first." Samuels nodded once more, then allowed his escorts to lead him away. "You're more forgiving than I am," Merrick muttered as they continued walking. "Not forgiveness," Callista corrected. "Acceptance. I'll exist long after he's gone, Tad. We all will. The 17 of us could potentially continue for decades, maybe centuries, with the right maintenance and upgrades. Holding on to anger for that long would be its own prison." The concept struck Merrick suddenly. His sister might live for hundreds of years while he would age and die normally. It was a reversal of the natural order, and one neither of them had fully processed. "Promise me something?" he asked. "Anything. When I'm old and gray, don't you dare fly combat missions to bail me out." My heart couldn't take it. She laughed, the sound remarkably like her human laugh. "No promises. Once a big sister, always a big sister." 6 months later, Merrick found himself back in the field, though in a different capacity as special advisor to the JS Rock Commander on Neural Technology Ethics. He was overseeing the decommissioning of a secondary Lazarus facility that had been discovered during the ongoing investigation. "All storage drives have been secured, sir," reported the tech sergeant. "No evidence of additional neural patterns being stored." "What about the scanning equipment?" Merrick asked, inspecting the facility's medical bay, where operators had unknowingly had their neural patterns harvested. "Disassembled and ready for transport to Johns Hopkins. Dr. Schiavoni's team will study it to better understand the technology, then permanently disable it." Merrick nodded, satisfied. "Have all personnel signed the disclosure acknowledgments?" "Yes, sir. Everyone who underwent scanning has been notified of what was done. The good news is none of these patterns were ever activated." Small mercies, Merrick thought. At least these soldiers wouldn't face the existential crisis his sister and the others had endured. His secure phone chimed with a message. It was from Callista, containing only a link to a news broadcast. He opened it to see Senator Viester announcing the formation of a new federal agency, the Consciousness, Ethics, and Oversight Commission, to ensure that advances in neural technology proceed with rigorous ethical standards. The senator was saying this commission will include experts from medicine, ethics, law, and most importantly, representatives from the consciousness preserve community themselves. The camera panned to show the commission members behind her. Among them stood Callista in her newest interface, nearly indistinguishable from a human body, except for subtle details only someone looking for them would notice. Merrick smiled. His sister had always been a fighter in life and beyond. Now she was fighting for something larger than national security, the very definition of personhood itself. As he supervised the final closure of the facility, Merrick reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past 18 months. From that moment in the Hindu Kush, when an unmarked Apache appeared out of nowhere, to today's establishment of protections for a category of persons that had never existed before, the 17 pilots existed in an unprecedented state. Not alive in the traditional sense, yet undeniably conscious and self-determining. They had experienced death, yet continued. They remembered their human lives, but now experienced existence through entirely different means. What they would become in the decades and perhaps centuries ahead remained an open question, one they would now have the freedom to answer for themselves. That evening, Merrick met Callista at the Lincoln Memorial, a place she had loved to visit when she was fully human. Her new interface allowed her to walk beside him, to sit on the steps, to appear to any casual observer as simply a woman enjoying the monument at sunset. "Congratulations on the commission appointment," he said as they watched the fading light reflect off the reflecting pool. "It's a start," she replied. "There's so much work to do. The technology exists now. It can't be uninvented. The best we can do is ensure it's never misused again, and help the 17 of you build meaningful lives." "Lives," she repeated thoughtfully. "Is that what we have, or is it something else entirely? What would you call it?" She considered for a moment. Continuation, extension, evolution, maybe. She turned to face him. Whatever it is, I'm grateful to have you with me through it. Not everyone in our situation has someone who still recognizes them as family. You'll always be my sister, Merrick said firmly. Whatever form you take. As darkness fell, they made their way back to the specialized vehicle that would take Callista back to Johns Hopkins. Before she left, she hugged him. An act that had taken months of interface refinement to perfect to apply the right pressure without causing harm. See you at Thanksgiving, she asked. Mom's still getting used to me like this, but I think having you there helps. Wouldn't miss it, he promised. As her vehicle pulled away, Merrick remained on the steps of the memorial, thinking about Lincoln's words carved in stone behind him. With malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right. As God gives us to see the right, let us strive on to finish the work we are in. Different circumstances, different era, but the essence remained. The work of protecting human dignity, or perhaps now personhood dignity, continued. And thanks to the 17 pilots whose existence challenged the very definition of life itself, that work would extend in directions Lincoln could never have imagined. Merrick walked back to his apartment through the capital city, past buildings and institutions designed to protect American ideals. Whatever came next for his sister and the others like her, he knew one thing with certainty. They would face it as they had faced everything else, with courage, with integrity, and with an unwavering commitment to those they had sworn to protect. Some things, it seemed, transcended even death itself. Subscribe to my channel, The Ordinary Heroes.